Okay, here I am. It's Saturday afternoon, April 7th. Several people have asked me if I was going to make a video addressing the proposed law that the California Democrats are proposing. And so yes, the answer is yes, I'm going to be making a video regarding that. And this is it. So what law am I talking about? Assemblyman Kevin McCarty and Assemblywoman Shirley Weber co-authored a bill, Assembly Bill 931, which coincidentally is not the bill that they supposedly have authored. If you look up Assembly Bill 931 right now, it is a bill regarding the Suicide Prevention Act of 2000 and making some changes to that. So my guess is this is going to be a gut and amend, just like they've done in the past with ramming different gun control laws through in California. They're going to take an existing bill, rip everything out of it, and rewrite it completely. So they keep talking about AB 931. No one I know of has actually seen the text from the bill that they're referring to, as if it's already written. So what that bill is, and this is quoting them, this is Shirley Weber said this. She says that deadly force should only be used when necessary. What they're talking about is changing California state law that talks about reasonable, the amount of force used to make an arrest or stop a bad guy. What law is that? Penal Code Section 835A, and I will read it to you. Any peace officer who has reasonable cause to believe that the person to be arrested has committed a public offense may use reasonable force to effect the arrest, to prevent escape, or to overcome resistance. A peace officer who makes or attempts to make an arrest need not retreat or desist from his efforts by reason of the resistance or threatened resistance of the person being arrested, nor shall such officer be deemed an aggressor or lose his right to self-defense by the use of reasonable force to effect the arrest or to prevent the escape or to overcome resistance. So that is the law they're talking about changing. Apparently they have a problem with the word reasonable, and they want to change it to the word necessary. So, first off, let me play this clip here. It's Shirley Weber, and she is introducing her bill and talking about exactly what she wants the bill to say.
This policy authorizes police officers to use deadly force only when it is necessary to prevent imminent and serious bodily injury or death. That is, if given the totality of the circumstances, there is no reasonable alternative to using deadly force, which is including warnings, verbal, persuasion, or other non-lethal methods or resolutions or de-escalation. We're not saying that law enforcement officers can never use deadly force. I want to stress that. Deadly force can be used, but only when it is completely necessary.
So that is what she is saying this should be, which is, let me repeat it, this authorizes peace officers to use deadly force only when it is necessary to prevent imminent serious bodily injury or death. Okay, going on, let's look at what Kevin McCarty has to say here. He takes the podium and then he throws out some inflammatory biased wording to try and make his point, and let's not forget, let's throw racism into it while we're at it. So here's a clip of Kevin McCarty talking about the same bill.
Too many people ask, how can a kid with a cell phone in his family's backyard be shot to death in the back by a law enforcement officer when they see examples of the 3,000 miles away, the Parkland shooter, not an African-American kid, gets arrested peacefully after slaughtering so many kids with an assault rifle?
According to Kevin, the Parkland shooter and Stephon Clark arrests should be compared. So let's talk about that. What did the Parkland shooter, why was he arrested without incident? Simple. He didn't resist. He did exactly what he was told to do by the officer who confronted him. How do I know that? Because they've interviewed the officer who arrested him, and he talked about it. Here it is right here in this video clip of the officer at a news conference.
As I continued down this roadway, I discovered an individual walking on the sidewalk that was wearing the clothing description that had been given over the radio. He looked like a typical high school student, and for a quick moment, I thought, could this be the person? Is this who I need to stop? Training kicked in. I pulled my vehicle over immediately, engaged the suspect. He complied with my commands and was taken into custody without any issues.
Okay, now let's talk about what Stephon Clark did. I've already talked about it in several of my videos, but we'll talk about it again. He was originally observed by the helicopter while he was breaking in the back window of a house. Actually, it was a sliding glass door. What did he do when the helicopter got there? Began running, started jumping fences. He jumped a fence into his backyard, his grandmother's backyard, and then he started walking towards the street. He was contacted by a cop there who yelled at him to stop running, to show his hands. But what he did was not that. He ran into the backyard and ran away from the cops. Again, still running from the cops. Another officer catches up to the first officer. They round the corner, and they see Stephon Clark pointing a cell phone at them. They mistook the cell phone for a gun. I've talked about this in previous videos. And then they ended up shooting and killing him. These are not comparable incidents. The Parkland shooter, I will give you, is a much worse criminal than Stephon Clark was. However, the Parkland shooter complied with officers when he was contacted by them and was arrested without incident. Stephon Clark did not do that. There is a common theme in all these people who are shot by officers. It's not that they're complying and doing what the officers are telling them. It's that they're doing the exact opposite of that. So moving on from there, Kevin McCarty throws out some completely bogus statistics that I have, God knows where they came from. Here it is right here. I'll let him say it himself.
The facts are the facts. The facts are young black men are 20 times more likely to be killed at the hands of a law enforcement officer than young Caucasian men. The time is now to revise this over 100-year-old law, which unfortunately too often justifies deadly force incidents. And this, I think, reasonable modernization, as Dr. Weber outlined, focuses on only when necessary as opposed to when reasonable, which is very different in the eyes of the beholder.
So according to Kevin McCarty, black men are 20 times more likely than white men to be shot by the police or shot by cops. I haven't the slightest clue where that came from. However, I have the actual real facts that Kevin apparently is completely unaware of. So let's talk about this real quick. Again, I spoke about this previously in my first video about the Stephon Clark shooting because unsurprisingly, Gavin Newsom was throwing around the same kind of BS that Kevin McCarty is throwing around here. So let's talk about this. In 2017, which is the source that I use for the statistics here, only listed 2017 and 2018. So I chose 2017 because 2018 clearly is not over with. In 2017, cops shot a total of 987 people. Of those 987 people, 457 of them were white and 223 were black. That's clearly not 20 times more than the white guys that were shot. So maybe he's talking about some sort of other percentage. So let's take a look at the percentage of people that were shot. The percentage of people shot by the cops who were black in 2017 was 22.5%. 22.5% of the people shot in 2017 by police were black men, or were black. I'm sorry, it just listed ethnicity, not gender as well. Of the 987 people shot in 2017 by police, 46% of them were white. I'm no mathematician, but 46% does not seem to be 20 times larger than 22.5%. So whether you're looking at raw numbers or percentage-wise, he's completely wrong. Moving on from there. So maybe he's looking at they're 20 times more likely to be shot by cops in some sort of comparison to the makeup of the population of the United States. So let's look at the population of the United States. Population of the United States, approximately 13.4%, I think is what it was. It's right around 13 to 14% of the United States population is black. So if you look at the percent of people shot by the police that are black, which is 22.5%, it is higher. However, you can't just take that number in a vacuum. You have to look at something else, which is how often people of different ethnicities are involved in crime. So what we're going to look at is the latest numbers that I can find from the FBI Uniform Crime Report. The newest complete version of that report is 2016. So yes, it's not the same year as 2017. However, the numbers of deaths from year to year don't change significantly. Neither do the number of arrests. So 2016, according to the FBI, there were 8,421,481 total arrests. Of those arrests, 5,858,330 were white, which comes out to 69.5% of the arrests were white. 2,263,112 of those arrests were black. That percentage is 26.8%. So if you look at the percentage of people shot by the police that are black and the percentage of the people arrested for crimes that are black, they're very similar numbers. Now somebody's going to say, well, why is the percentage of people that are white higher for crimes and lower for shootings? And the only thing I can offer to that, as an answer to that is perhaps it's a cultural thing that that white people don't fight or resist the cops as often as black arrestees. I couldn't tell you for sure. That's just a guess on my part. Moving on from that. Talked about that. So let's talk about why necessary versus reasonable is a huge issue. First off, let's talk about something else before I get too far ahead. So if you want to look at necessary versus reasonable, this law that they're proposing has already been addressed by the Supreme Court. The standard by which an officer's use of force is to be judged is the reasonable standard. This comes out of the case Graham versus Connor in 1989. And I will read you the pertinent part here. The Fourth Amendment reasonableness inquiry is whether the officer's actions are objectively reasonable in light of the facts and circumstances confronting them, without regard to their underlying intent or motivation. The reasonableness of a particular use of force must be judged from the perspective of a reasonable officer on the scene, and its calculus must embody an allowance for the fact that police officers are often forced to make split-second decisions about the amount of force necessary in a particular situation. It goes on to say that you cannot consider 20/20 hindsight when reviewing a use of force, which is exactly what everyone wants to do every time there's a police shooting. In this instance with Stephon Clark, everybody's like, well, he wasn't pointing a gun, he was pointing a cell phone at the officers. So I want to say it was 2 years ago, there was a shooting in Ohio, I think. Pretty sure it was Ohio. And this gentleman here, his YouTube channel is Possum Popper, I think 89 or something like that. He produced this video. And let's take a look at a couple of clips from this and talk about why reasonable versus necessary is a huge issue.
from the ready gun. .92. .74. .80. What, you shoot me? You racist. Wallet.
Okay, as you can see, he clearly demonstrated that it takes just a split second for somebody to pull something out, and the officers only have a fraction of a second to determine whether it's a gun or a cell phone or a wallet. A lot of that decision making that an officer is using to determine what this person is going to be pulling out is based on their past actions, what the officer is encountering up to that point. If it is a completely cooperative person, they aren't going to lean towards their pulling a weapon out. If it is somebody who is running from you, running from the helicopter, breaking into homes, they're automatically going to lean towards something more than pulling out a cell phone or a wallet. You're basing that person's potential future actions on their past actions. So let's take a look at this instance here. This is a Pasadena police officer this is just recently performed a vehicle stop on a guy. One of the other questions people often ask in these shootings is why did they shoot him so many times? Well, this is a perfect example of why, and why it's reasonable to fire more than just one round. Reasonable is a very important term here. So if you watch the video of this shooting, I'm going to show you just the dash cam of this shooting. You'll see the officer makes a stop. Bad guy gets out of his car, starts to get out of his car, and he's hiding his right hand. Or was it his left hand? Sorry, I don't recall off the top of my head. He's hiding one of his hands. The officer stays behind cover. Bad guy ends up pulling out a gun. Officer shoots him several times. Bad guy gets up, starts walking around. Officer moves to a different position of cover, keeps his car between him and the bad guy. Bad guy's still walking around. He's received several rounds, likely fatal rounds because of where they hit him in the chest. Bad guy moves out into the street, still holding the gun. Officer ends up getting another clean shot, drops the bad guy, threat's over. He fired numerous rounds the first time, and the bad guy was still up and mobile.
Hey, stay in the vehicle. Stay in the vehicle. Stay in the vehicle. Show me your hands. Show me your hands. Hey! Shots fired. Shots fired. What are you looking out for?
Steady for one out. Okay.
Now let's talk about another situation and why reasonableness is extremely important. This occurred in Brooklyn, New York. NYPD just released this video just a couple days ago. I'll show you the video here, but I'll talk about it real quickly. There is a black man. He's in the center of most of these videos. You'll see him walk up to people and he's pointing something that looks like a gun at people. People who got this item pointed at them thought it was a gun and they called the cops. They called 911. Multiple people called 911. One of the store owners called 911, said this guy's running around pointing a gun at people. Cops show up. First thing the guy does is lift it up, takes a shooting stance, points it right at the cops, and they plug him. He's dead. Ends up not being a gun. Ended up being some sort of weird looking pipe thing. They released a photo of it. But it wasn't a gun. However, their actions, based on what they knew prior to going into this, were completely reasonable. So, watch that video, and then we'll talk about the next thing. So let's talk about the importance of having kind of a frame of reference. Maricopa County had a shooting a while back. This is going a couple of years back as well. And they invited some of the protesters out to do some force-on-force training. So a little bit of education for the people that were out there. One of the people was a very outspoken black gentleman. I believe he was a pastor. And they had him out there, and they suited him up. They put him, gave him a gun and some other cop stuff, and then they put him in a couple of situations. And in multiple situations, he ended up shooting an unarmed man. Afterwards, he walked away from that with a different point of view. He realized from that training that things cannot be viewed with 20/20 hindsight. Things are a lot different when they're live and happening right in your face. So here's a couple of clips from that.
Tonight at 9, he is one of the most outspoken critics of police use of force here in the Valley. But he gets some on-the-job training about use of force tonight.
Very interesting stuff. Reverend Jarrett Maupin led protests and marches after Phoenix police shot and killed an unarmed man. Well, tonight he gets a chance to experience the split-second decisions that police have to make when encountering a suspect.
And our Troy Hayden was right along with him tonight getting the training as well. This must have been eye-opening.
It was a really interesting experience. You know, we've all watched those protests all over the country after police officers are accused of shooting people who aren't armed. But what would happen if one of those protesters felt what it was like to wear a badge and then be put in a life or death situation himself?
So I'm going to have you put the holster on right inside your belt loop there.
Jarrett Maupin gets his weapon. You might recognize him as a high-profile organizer in the minority community. Just last month, he led marches on Phoenix Police headquarters after an officer shot an unarmed man.
We want his badge. We want his gun. We want his job.
Today, he accepted an invitation to look at things from the other side, agreeing to go through a force-on-force training session with the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. 3 scenarios where you have to decide to shoot or not shoot. Scenario 1 is a call about a man casing cars in a parking lot. Maupin approaches the man and starts asking questions.
What? You're looking for your vehicle. What kind of car do you drive?
Wave your hand in your gun.
What kind of car do you drive?
This is my car, man.
Maupin, the officer, is shot. It happens that fast.
At what time did you think that it was time for you to address the use of force that was given? When he came to the back of the vehicle, and was hiding. You know, I could sense something was wrong.
Scenario 2, a call of 2 men fighting.
What's going on today, gentlemen?
What's wrong with you?
What's going on today, gentlemen?
What do you want?
What's happening here?
What's wrong with you?
Back up.
Huh? What are you doing, man? Hey,
he shouldn't approach me. He shouldn't approach me. He shouldn't approach me. He shouldn't approach me.
What happened in there?
Yeah.
What are you doing? You just shot him?
Hey, he rushed me. Tell me why you shot. Well, I've shot because he was within that zone. You know, I felt there was an imminent threat. I didn't necessarily see him armed, but he came clearly to do some harm to the officer, to my person. It's hard to make that call. It shakes you up.
Again, an unarmed man was shot. Scenario 3, a call about a possible burglar walking down the street. Maupin gets him on the ground. He's not complying.
I need you to keep your hands up, sir.
For what?
Because I need to check that waistband.
Well, why? What are you doing,
Because I don't know what you have under there.
Everybody, look at this guy. What are you doing?
No shots fired, but the suspect did have a hidden knife in his waistband. I went through the scenarios too, without seeing what Maupin did.
Do you have keys, or do you have anything to show me that?
Don't worry about it.
No, I need to talk to you. Come on out over here. Well, I'm dead. Maricopa County Sheriffs, get on the ground. Get on the ground. Both of you, get on the ground. Get on the ground.
For what?
Get back. Get back.
Same results for both of us. Things happen very fast out here. I asked Maupin what his biggest takeaway from this exercise will be.
I didn't understand how important compliance was, but after going through this, yeah, my attitude has changed. This is all unfolding in 10 to 15 seconds. People need to comply with the orders of law enforcement officers for their own sake.
So let's talk about reasonable versus necessary. Reasonableness covers what the officer perceives. If it's reasonable for the officer to act based on what he knows at the time, that's where reasonableness comes into play. Necessary is going to change the whole game. And I don't mean game. It's going to change the whole landscape of this. Because if you were to look at things with, was it necessary? By doing that, you're automatically going to look at 20/20 hindsight. Because that's how you determine whether it was necessary. So somebody points this at you, and you're a cop, and you shoot them. Part of the investigation is going to be to find out whether that was, one, a real firearm or just a simulated firearm. Two, if it was a real firearm, was it actually loaded? Because if it wasn't loaded, it wasn't necessary for you to shoot that person. This proposed law is going to have unimaginable consequences. First off, you're looking at some things here. For one, you're going to have the cops who don't just quit because now they have to risk their lives every single day, more so than normal. For the cops that don't leave, which is probably going to be only the ones who are getting near retirement, the ones who have any option to get out are going to be all the people that are newer. So the newer folks are probably going to leave. The folks that are going to stick around are going to be the ones who are nearing retirement who can't afford to leave because they will lose their retirement. And what those folks are going to do is they're going to go into full reactive mode. They're not going to go out and do any kind of proactive police work. They're going to just wait things out until the event is over with, then they'll go in and clean up the mess. Why would you go risk your life if you are facing murder charges for shooting at somebody who may have pointed an unloaded gun at you? The other thing you're going to have, which we're already having nationwide right now, we are having huge problems recruiting anyone into this field. Gee, I wonder why. Politicians are jumping on the bandwagon left and right to make cops look bad. That's been going on for 9 years now, at least. The media has been on that same bandwagon. Certain communities feel that cops are the enemy, so those folks in that community aren't coming out to try to be a cop. Why would you when your entire family is going to hate you for what you do for a living? We are already bleeding bodies. In other words, we are losing more people every single year than we can hire. Every agency I know of is not able to hire enough bodies to cover just the bodies that are leaving, let alone adding additional bodies. We can't get enough qualified people in academies, not enough qualified people are graduating the academies, and then of those qualified people who actually graduate the academy, they can go anywhere they want because there's so many agencies that are right now that are hiring. We are in a crisis as far as law enforcement hiring bodies. We just can't get enough. If this law were to pass, that's going to increase that problem exponentially. I understand. I take it back. I don't understand this. Here's the problem. These lawmakers who are writing these laws really have no concept of what actually law enforcement is. They're sitting there in their offices. They're listening to people complain to them. They're getting one view only. I challenge any and every one of these lawmakers that are willing to sign on to this bill to put themselves out there for some force-on-force training just to see exactly what this is like. I don't expect them to get in a cop car and go out and do ride-alongs where they could actually get injured. Let's do this in a safe, controlled environment where the only thing you face is maybe embarrassment, maybe a little bit of pain if we're using simunition or airsoft guns. But don't just sit there and try and legislate this with no actual knowledge of what goes into this job. You need to have some experience. Just like anybody writing laws about firearms needs to know what firearms do. The laws, the way they're written for firearms, are ridiculous, and they're obviously written by people who don't have a clue about firearms. That's the same thing that's going on right here.